Hi! In this video, we're going to be converting some existing VBA code into a class. The code that we're going to use is the code that we created in my Custom Enumerations Employment Type Practical Example video. So if you don't have this code already, you can watch that video and it will walk you through creating the code. If you need an overview of how classes work, please watch my Creating Classes in VBA video. Okay, so to start, if you remember, towards the end of my employment type video, I added this intern member to the enumeration. And I added it just to show how to add it, but I didn't add it anywhere else in the code where it would be needed. So let's go ahead and do that now. So there are two places that we would need this code. The first is here in this subroutine that contains the select case that decides which set of forms to print based on the employment type. So let's go ahead and copy this line and change this enumeration from temporary to intern. And we'll change the name of this subroutine that it calls also to intern. And this subroutine does not exist yet, so let's go ahead and create it. So let's copy this and paste it. And then we'll change everywhere it says temporary, we'll change it to intern for the current procedure only. Because if we do it for the module, it's going to change all of these ones too. Okay, so let's change this employment type to intern. And then we'll go ahead and run the code to make sure that it's working correctly and also to remind us of how this code works and what it's doing before we turn it into a class. So let me step through this code. So we're going to assign the first name, assign the last name, assign the employment type, and then we're going to run this procedure that checks the employment type, which is 5, which is this intern that we added. And then we are going to check each case, and we see that when we get to intern, then this subroutine gets executed. And then we come down here and we print it to our immediate window. Okay, so that is the code and it's working fine. Before we change this code into a class, let's talk about our game plan, what we're going to do to change this code into a class. So first off, all of these variables will become properties of the class. So first name, last name, and employment type. All of these subroutines that deal with the printing of the forms will become methods of the class. And all of them will be private when they're in the class, with the exception of this one that checks the employment type. This one will be public. And the reason for that is because if we look at this code that we ran just now when we stepped through the code, this was the only code that we ran. All of the other code was run from this sub by calling this subroutine, print employee forms. And so that's why this one needs to be public and all of the other ones can be private because we don't need to see them outside of the class because we didn't run them directly. And I'm going to go over that more later after we've actually created the class so that you understand it a little bit more. But for now, just know that this subroutine is going to be the only method that is public, and all the rest of these subroutines that print the form for each individual employment type are going to be private. Next, let's talk about this subroutine. This subroutine is not going to be part of the class that we create, but we are going to create a subroutine that is going to be very similar, in which we instantiate the class and call this method to print the forms. this enumeration is also going to stay outside of the class. And we're going to put it in a separate module from this subroutine where we're going to store all of our public entities. So let me show you that right now. So let's create just a regular module and name it public entities. And then let's come back to our code and copy this. I'm just going to copy it instead of cutting it because I want to preserve all of this code so we can look at it later. And just paste it in here. And I will comment it out for now so it doesn't cause a conflict. This method of creating a module to hold public entities is something I read about in a book one time. And I wish I could remember the name of the book, but I can't. And I found this to be very helpful. This is where I put all of my global variables. In general, you don't want many global variables. You want to keep them to the absolute minimum because it can cause problems if you have too many global variables. But my experience has been that enumerations I generally want to be global because I'm using them all throughout my project. And so we're going to put them here and they're going to be public, which means it's global to the entire project. And so we can access them from anywhere in the project. I have also found that trying to put enumerations in a class causes problems. But in this instance, we also, and in most instances, we don't want it in the class anyway. Okay, so now we have this new module, and then we have this module where we have the code that we're converting. So let's go ahead and create our class module now. So we're going to insert a class module and let's name it employee. We're going to call this an employee class. And so let's copy all of this code, Control A to select everything, Control C to copy, and then Control A because we want to overwrite this because we don't want it in here twice since we copied it from the other module, and then Control V to paste. And this is easier if we're going to convert because then we can just delete the things that we don't want rather than copying things over one by one. So let's delete this because we already put it in this other module. So now we can start adding our properties to this class. As we discussed, all of these variables are going to become properties of the class. So let's copy these and paste them up here. But this dim statement is not how we want to declare them here. We want to declare them to be private. And that means that they are private to this class. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more later. But for now, let's just change all of these to private. And then as we did in our other video, we're just going to preface these all with a P. And now we need to add our getters and setters for each one of these. And actually, I'm just going to get rid of the S's and the E there. And so let's copy this first name and then come up to Insert Procedure. And we'll just paste that first name in as the name of the procedure. This is going to be a property. And it's going to be public because we would like to be able to access this property outside of the class. So let's click OK, and it's going to put it down here at the bottom. And I don't like it there, so I'm going to cut it and I'm going to put it here. And now we need to change this variant because this type is a string. So we need to change the data type of both of these to a string. And then we just need to finish creating these properties. So when we do the setter, we're going to set this variable equal to the argument that is getting passed in. So in other words, the value that we're setting this property to for the class. So we'll do that. And then we need to change for the getter, when we're trying to get this value out of the class, this is the value we need to return. So this property needs to return this value that we set here. which is the value that we passed in to this property when we set the value outside of the class, which we'll do later. And I don't like this here. You can leave this here. It's perfectly fine. I always just name it the name of the property, arg. That's just how I like it. So I'm going to do that here. And now that we've got our first one, we just need to do that for the other two. So I'm just going to copy this. And now this is going to be last name. So I'm just going to change first to last for the selected text and replace all. Okay, now I've got my second one, and this is fine because this is also a string. And now I just need to do this one more time. So I'm going to copy this one. And now I need to change last name to employment type for this set of getters and setters. And now this data type is enum employee type, which if we look at our enumeration, we see is this enum employee type. So this is the data type that we need to change this getter and setter to. And so we need to just find it here. There it is, enum employee type. And we need to change it for both the getter and the setter. And so now we have our three properties for this class: first name, last name, and employment type. And here are the getters and setters for those properties. And so now we can get rid of this sub because we've copied these variables out of here. We don't need it in here anymore. And now let's work on our methods. And as we discussed, all of these subroutines are going to become methods. And before we continue with this, I want to talk a little bit about the scope of the variables in this class and passing arguments to these functions. So now that these subroutines are methods of the class, we no longer need to pass these variables in. Because if you look at these variables that we're passing to the function, first name, last name, and employment type, they're all of the properties that we just created for this class. When we set the values for these properties, when we get to the part where we instantiate this class, we will have those values, and so we don't need to pass them into these methods anymore. And that's going to become more clear. I'll show you that. I'll talk about it a little bit more when we instantiate this class, but for now let's just delete these all because we don't need to pass them anymore. And we can do that for all of these subroutines. Okay, and so now that we no longer are passing these variables into the subroutines, you might ask, okay, so where are these values coming from then? And the answer is they're going to be these values here that we set when we instantiate the class. So all we need to do is change all of these S first name into P first name. So let's just go ahead and do that. We will change S first name, just copy it, and paste it, and then change this to a P. And we're going to do this for the whole module, for the current module. We want it to be done everywhere in the class. So replace all. And we need to do that for all of these. So last name. And for employment type, we don't need to change them here in these subroutines because we're just hard coding the employment type, but we do need to change it here. And I changed my mind about this a little bit. I do want the E in there. So let's do a replace on this, and let's do the employment type without the P because we want to get all of them. And let's just add the little E there because I just want to give myself a little indication that it's an enumeration. And so for the current module, let's replace all. Oops, we got the double E, but that doesn't matter because we are going to change this anyway to this P, this one with the P in front, that is private to the class. And so now, if we look at this subroutine, we see that these are still being passed, but these don't take any arguments anymore, so we don't need these either. So we can just delete all of these. So now we should have all of our variables and methods set. However, we do need to change the scope of these, some of these. So if we do not add any keyword for public or private for these subroutines, then the default is public. And we do want this one to be public, so we'll go ahead and put public there. But as we discussed, we want all of these other ones to be private. So we're going to go ahead and put private in front of all of these. Okay, so let's review a little bit what we did. We changed all of our variables into properties of the class. We changed all of our methods so that they no longer are accepting any arguments, although they could. Methods in a class can accept arguments, but we don't need them to in this case. And we also removed the passing of the arguments from these subroutine calls here. And I feel like we're probably a little bit confused at this point. So let's actually instantiate the class and see it in action, and hopefully things will become a little bit more clear to us what we did and why we did it. Oh, and we also changed these to private and just kept this one method public. Okay, so let's create a new module, just a regular module, and we will call this one Employee Demo. And now in this module, this is where we're going to instantiate the class and run the code. So let's create a subroutine called Get Employee Forms. And the first thing we're going to do is declare our class object. So I'm just going to call this C employee because our class is an employee. And the data type is going to be this employee class we just created. And actually, I'm just going to add the new keyword in here so that we have a new instance of it as well. We're just going to do it all in one line there. To remind you, if we did not have this new keyword here, we could do it in 2 steps where we set the object that we just declared equal to a new instance of employee. We could do it that way, but the shortcut is to just add the new keyword when we declare the object. And so that's what we're going to do this time. So now we have our employee class object instantiated. And so let's go ahead and set some values for it. And so I'm just going to use a with statement here so that we can just kind of get them all. And so I hit my dot, and now the first thing I want you to notice is the things that are available for me to choose from. I can choose employment type, first name, last name, and print employee forms. That's 4 things, right? But if I come over here and look at my class module, I see that there's the 3 variables that are available to me, and there's like a whole bunch of other stuff here that I'm not seeing, right? I'm not seeing any of these methods. The only method that I'm seeing is this one. And that is because this one is declared to be public and all of these are declared to be private. If I decided that I needed to see one of these, all I need to do is change the keyword to public. And now if I come back out here, I see there it is, print forms contractor. That's the one I just changed to public. But as we discussed previously, we don't need to see this one outside of the class because this one is going to run all of these ones for us. And so we don't have a need to ever access this one outside of the class. So I'm just going to change it back to private. And so now this is private again. And if we come out here, we see that it is no longer available in the list for us. And so that is the purpose of declaring our methods either public or private. It determines whether or not we can see them outside of the class. So now I want to go ahead and set some values for these variables. So let's do first name, Deborah, last name, Smith, and we'll set the employment type to be seasonal. And so now we have the value set for all of our properties. So now let's include our print employee form statement. And now we should be good to go. So let's show our immediate window. Get rid of that. And I'm just going to come over here and I'm going to select everything and just comment it all out just to make sure there's no conflicts with this code that we just wrote. And so let's go ahead and run this code. And there we go. Deborah Smith, seasonal. Deborah Smith, seasonal. And so you see we didn't pass any variables like we did with this code. We didn't do any of this passing of variables here or here. And so let's talk about why that is. So let's step through this code step by step and see what's going on. Okay, so here, we declared the class and instantiated it. And now with this object that we just created, that we just instantiated, we come here to the first name and we're setting the value to be Deborah. So we come in here to our class. So we see that the value we passed in was Deborah. We're setting the value Deborah to this P first name variable right here. And so once we execute that line, we see there's the value Deborah. And so what has happened now, because this variable has been declared to be private, that means it's private to the class. That means it is available anywhere in the class now. It's global to this class, not global to the entire project, but it is global to this class module. So we can use this value anywhere in this class module, and this value will persist until we either change the value, we change it this way, or the class object is destroyed. Okay, and so we have that one set, and now we come here, and same thing with the last name. We are passing in the value Smith as the last name. It's getting set up here, and now it's available to the class. And as we said, this value Deborah is also still available in the class. And then the same thing with the employment type. We're setting it here, and now this employment type is available, which is 3, which, as we discussed in a previous video, these are actually longs, and so we're getting the number and not the actual, not the word, but we see that seasonal is indeed 3, and so this value is set to 3. The last name is Smith, and the first name is Deborah, and so we have set all of our properties now, and now we're moving on to executing this method, print employee forms. And so we come here, we come to the select case statement, we check the employment type, which is 3, which, as we discussed, is seasonal. And so we come here, we check all of our cases, and seasonal is the correct one. So we come over here and we execute this print form seasonal. And again, we don't need to pass any variables to this because we're going to use the properties of the class instead. So we come here, and now we see in our debug.print statement, that this P first name variable is sent to Deborah because, again, because we have declared it to be private, it's private to this class and it's available to us until we change the value or the class object that we declared here is destroyed. Okay, and so then this just gets executed. It will be Deborah Smith seasonal. I can show this again. And we print this, and we get all our values printed to the immediate window, and that's the end of the sub, and then we come out here and we finish executing in this module here. And so that is how we convert existing code into a class module.